So, for our deep dive, we are talking about political media. And so this is something that's been on my mind for a while. First of all, because we are now in the space.
Are we political media now?
we are technically political media.
That's crazy.
And so I guess talking about it can make us seem more interesting and self-aware than
it'll be kind of like a meta conversation.
It will, yeah. But also because a lot of times we talk through these problems, and when you get to the core of it, you realize that the reason that they can't be fixed is political will isn't there.
Mm-hmm.
And so why isn't political will there? Well, it often tends to be the thought processes, right, of certain people. And the way that those are often governed is based on the media that people consume.
Definitely.
Because very few people are involved, engaged, curious enough to really scope out enough information to learn about the issues themselves. So really,
and it's time consuming. It's really hard.
Oh my God.
If you want to be like, dude, the amount of research we do to talk about 6 current events on a weekly basis is insane.
So much. And then we do this deep dive.
Right. Which takes so much time.
Yeah. So we get it. Obviously, like I would never put this much time in if we didn't do the podcast.
No.
But because of that, it means that I think most people tend to be underinformed, right? Because people are generally getting their information from one source, or if they get it from multiple sources, they get it from multiple sources that give them a similar perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, because of that, and because we live in a democracy where the people decide who governs, it's a really important part of the political ecosystem. So I'm going to start at the very, very beginning of political media.
Yeah, you went into the history of this, and I thought it's so fucking interesting. Dude.
Yeah, it is pretty interesting. I hit a few like specific points, so I don't have really a continuous line, but where it really began in America was in Boston, where we were at, because there were high literacy rates and a desire for self-government. And this happened before the revolution. So we're talking like 1750s, 1760s. And something big happened in 1765 where the stamp tax was implemented. And the stamp tax was levied by Britain, by Royal England, to make it harder for the colonists to disseminate information out amongst each other, because they thought that it might make them harder to control, harder to govern. Well, it worked. They caused many newspapers to shutter, and that triggered the papers to start trying to incite riots and rebellion. Mm-hmm. They were basically fighting for their own survival and saying, hey, it's wrong for us to get taxed like this, and you should be mad on our behalf. And so people started to get angry. And the papers had a huge part in really inciting the revolution, spiraling up to the point where you get the Boston Tea Party in 1773. You get the Boston Massacre. And they're suggesting an American governing body equal to that of England. So once you get that, and you have England continuing to tax without representation, that's where it really was these newspapers that prepare the fertile soil for the revolution.
Kind of. And that's like a great example of what the media is like. Its greatest power is.
Yes.
Is to truly make public opinion or expand the reach of specific opinions that are people wanting to know, but they don't have all the pieces together yet.
Yes.
Right? It's like something that it's like you have this general feeling of why of something you feel. You don't know why you feel it. You don't know what to do with that. But with media and with the outreach of political groups and newspapers and news organizations, you learn what's going on in the wider world and then how you can affect it.
Exactly. Yeah. It galvanizes people who already have opinions, and it kind of gives opinions to people who maybe weren't that involved before.
Mm-hmm.
Media in this way, like, it's a perfect example. Like you're saying, media is the thought leaders. And I would say, like, this is a reason that I enjoy doing the podcast and would like to grow it. completely transparently, because I would like to be one of those thought leaders. I
Mhm.
feel like, and I think we're both this way, where we learn about things and we don't just listen to other sources of information. We read the information, we dissect it ourselves, and we come to our own opinions.
Right.
Um, and that feels like enough work and worthy enough to disseminate it out to people.
And I think it makes a difference. I mean, we just said it takes a lot of time to sit here and analyze the news and analyze what's going on, analyze the specific policy, analyze what's in the CHIPS Act. And when we do it, we don't just want us to know. We want all of you to know.
Yeah,
Because we want an informed voter base. We want everyone to know what's going on.
exactly.
That's in our interest. It's for the nation's interest. And that's what media is when it's at its best.
Absolutely. So you get the media comes into the revolution, it starts, and after the revolution, there's a new era. It's called the party press era. So newspaper publications became distinctly partisan because editors received patronage from the parties because fees and advertising revenues were not enough to support printing costs. So because of this, newspapers started aligning to the parties who were paying for them to be printed. And in fact, many of the editors on the newspapers were those very politicians.
Wow.
It got to the point where the second president, John Adams, passed the Sedition Act in 1798, which barred publications from criticizing the government, which, thinking about that right now, is it's unthinkable. Fortunately, Thomas Jefferson, the third president, repealed it during his tenure in office. But this was kind of the seeds of capitalist capture of the media, of information, right? And I think it's a really important time to point out because those are the seeds of the plants of media that we're still dealing with today.
Right.
Obviously.
That type of capitalist capture happens all the time. I mean, we read Politico a lot, and a lot of times you'll see sponsored by Lockheed Martin at the top. Or every time I listen to the Politico playbook every morning during the weekdays, and it'll be like sponsored by Petroleum Energy Associates or something.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, are you going to sit here and tell me that doesn't affect the story you cover?
Yeah.
Or like they'll have ads on their website that is completely looking like an article, but it's actually written by the corporation that gave them money.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to be really careful. Politico does some good work. They do a lot of also sleazy stuff. You know what I mean? You got to be careful.
It's interesting when we think about this because I think this is a great opportunity for us to be transparent about what we're doing.
Yeah.
Because we've definitely thought about monetizing this.
Yeah. Which we are not at the point of doing yet at all. Not even close.
No. But does it make you think, like, do we have to be very selective about the advertisers that we get?
Oh, yeah.
Even if we unequivocally say we're not going to let you influence what we say, we have to make sure that the image also is that there's nothing influencing what we could be talking about.
I think that image is important for credibility reasons for us, of course, but I think it's also like, I think the audience should expect more from their media. You know what I mean? Like the audience shouldn't have to accept that they live in a world that Lockheed Martin owns the news you're reading, right? I think that's kind of messed up.
Sure.
Because when push comes to shove, you do butter your bread. You butter your bread with the, whatever. What's the phrase?
I don't know. You're like in bed with the people. I don't know.
Whatever.
The people paying your paychecks control you.
Yes. And
that's the point.
Every time. Okay. It doesn't matter how often you say like, no, I'm not going to be bought out. If they give you money, push comes to shove.
But the question is then who's okay to take money from? Right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's really hard, but I don't know, some stupid like book company or something like.
Yeah.
Something that's not high stakes.
Someone who sells mattresses.
Someone who sells yeah, exactly. Like a mattress. Yeah.
Something that's not politicized.
Right. It's just not like a key industry that controls our political system.
Okay.
Right?
Sure.
I feel like that's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something that would hold up in a court of law, basically. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
So the next thing that I talked about. So the party press era is said to have ended in 1833. It started around like 1780s. After the revolution, but basically the penny press was introduced, which allowed for a less expensive publication so that papers didn't have to rely on their patrons anymore, but it had kind of already sunk into the system, so the papers remained partisan. And in 1860 the census said that still about 80% of publications were partisan.
Yeah, and there's no incentive for the political people to lose these newspapers, right? I mean, like, if you're involved in politics and you've paid to keep these newspapers partisan, even if the larger economic reasons of doing so, of making it partisan in the first place, aren't there anymore, if you're the political party, you're going to fight tooth and nail to keep them partisan because it's been benefiting you for so long.
Yeah, and I wonder if this kind of mirrors what's now happening in the present, where these papers had captured audiences that liked what they were saying because they were on a certain partisan side, and so it made sense for business in that way as well.
Well, now, so this is interesting because we're going to bring up this term audience capture, and in a lot of areas, Fox News, even on MSNBC, right? A lot of these shows are suffering from audience capture, where if you've been conservative your whole show, but now you disagree with a conservative commentator, if you say something negative about that conservative politician that you no longer like, what if your audience leaves you and now you don't get the money anymore?
Yeah.
And, us from a very, very small scale have actually seen that happen. We've posted videos that get us a lot of right-wing support. And then we put another video out that's criticizing the right wing, and then we lose a bunch of followers.
Yeah.
We've had videos where we're very, very leftist, and then we post a conservative video, and then we lose a bunch of followers.
Yeah.
And it's like, do better, guys. I mean, accept a differing opinion. Accept some, don't be so stringent on what you want to hear.
Yes.
Okay? Just accept a different form of analysis that you might not be used to.
It's so funny because I see that as a way to make us more credible.
Yeah.
But to someone who wants incredible sources of information, they're going to go away.
And does everybody want incredible source information? I hope not.
Yeah.
Please. Come on, guys.
Yeah. Show us that you want to learn the truth.
Yeah, please. God.
We are the only source of truth.
Speaking of the truth, what's our next phase?
Yeah.
Right.
So yellow journalism is next. It arises in the late 19th century with Joseph Pulitzer, of all people, which I didn't know about. Of course, you're more of a history buff, but it's just wild that the Pulitzer Prize for the highest tier of writing in journalism comes from the person who invented yellow journalism, which I haven't even said what it is yet, but it's sensational, it's scandalous, it's what you would expect in a tabloid today. The crazy thing is it's psychologically addictive. So it triggered this different thing in people. And the reason I think it's important to isolate this as an era is because before, these sources of information they were partisan, but they were about disseminating information. And now it's about activating people. It's about activating their nervous system, activating their fight or flight neurological circuitry.
That's great.
Right? And so with these sensationalist stories, they were very heavily moralized and made people feel very strongly about the characters in them, their rightness or wrongness. It's more like when you watch a TV show or you read a novel and you get attached to these characters. These sensational stories could do the same thing, but that's extremely damaging because it's distortionary of real life. So there was a 1910 critique of the newspaper industry by Frances Fenton. She quoted President Theodore Roosevelt's accusation that contemporary newspapers habitually and continually, and as a matter of business, practice every form of mendacity known to man.
Am I an idiot? What's mendacity mean? Do you know? Or did I just call you out?
Yeah.
And make you look like an idiot?
You did. And
finally, I've finally given it back to you after all the times you've made me look like a fool. You're the fool. All right, what's mendacity?
Well, I'm realizing.
Oh, it means lying.
Okay, well, I'm realizing that I'm also stupid because this doesn't actually really connect to what the point I was just making. So.
I'm going to clip that and post that one.
You should. You really should. We just need to, start a war between each other.
I posted a clip a little bit ago that had this sarcastic SpongeBob on your shoulder. Yes. That was more roasting me, but I still thought that was funny.
It was so good.
You know how long it took me to figure out how to do that?
Totally worth it. Totally worth it. But the rest of the quote is that it's so as a matter of business, practice every form of mendacity known to man, from the suppression of truth and the suggestion of the false to the lie direct. So I'll use this to transition to this other point, that yellow journalism was the beginning of really straying from the truth. We talk about partisan reporting, and I think like MSNBC is a really good example of something that's very partisan, but still deals in truth, still deals in factual events.
And I'm going to defend
reality.
Fox News. I also think Fox News at least tells the truth. It's a very hard thing to say, but like I feel like they're not actively lying to you about present reality.
I think the difference is that Fox spends more time and energy, so much time and energy, communicating opinions about the facts that it almost becomes hard to parse out what the actual facts were.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah. So, but this is Roosevelt in 1910 is criticizing newspapers for the same thing, right? Suggestion of the false, suppression of the truth.
Yeah.
And that's where these media outlets get their power from. They get to decide what to report on, and they get to decide what perspective to report on it.
Yes.
There was a really specific instance of this where William Randolph Hearst, who was kind of like Pulitzer's competitor in the yellow journalism sphere,
Didn't know that.
at the time, his coverage of the sinking of the USS Maine was really sensationalist and potentially started the Spanish-American War.
I mean, there was no hard evidence that Spain sunk. Jesus Christ, did I just lose my voice? Hold on. There's no evidence that Spain sunk the USS Maine.
Yeah.
But when you read William's explanation of it, it very much seems like, oh, Spain definitely did it.
And so it's that kind of reporting that can start wars, that can lead white nationalists to kill people. This is so, and it's also the kind of reporting that gets people to read it.
Yes.
And that's why it's so powerful as a business tool.
Yeah.
So that was yellow journalism. This leads into my next phase, which I skip over a lot of time. There was a lot that I could have talked about with McCarthyism, but I skipped to Roger Ailes,
which is the most important for us to understand in the current world we live in, right? He basically makes our current media environment.
Exactly. So he first came up as an advisor to Nixon in the late 60s, early 70s. And he suggested to Nixon that there wasn't a conservative-friendly media outlet, that the existing TV outlets were all leaning liberal, which I speculate is just because liberals follow reality a little bit more, or they have more popular policies. But that's just speculation. So he spearheads the development of kind of pre-Fox News outlets in the late 70s and the early 80s. And of course, in 1996, Fox News begins, and he's heading that up. And Ailes died a few years ago, but he's kind of been the pioneer of creating this entire separate echo chamber, or just chamber and space for conservative news to exist on TV and in spaces that are respected at the same level as more liberal-leaning news or even more neutral news programs.
We're already saying that, right? Like, think about the idea of we need a conservative news network. Isn't the news the news? What do you mean a conservative news network?
Exactly.
Like, that's so confusing to me. Like, you have online, you have Wikipedia, right? Mm-hmm. There's another website called Conservapedia, where it's Wikipedia, but all the topics are through a lens of conservatism, right?
Yes.
And so that's so strange that there's conservative news.
Yes.
Like, there's a different reality to it?
Because Wikipedia, I cannot think of a source that is more like nonpartisan,
right,
that is more impartial to reality and the facts. But the problem is that those facts tend to counter conservative viewpoints so often that they seek out their own outlets. And in a way, the last thing I'll mention is social media has kind of been the last frontier of this.
Yeah.
And
I don't know my conclusions of it yet at all.
I think it's perfected it, right? Because if anyone can publish news, and anyone can decide to consume or believe it from anyone else, then it's not just that you have like Fox News as an outlet. You can go to any level of extremism, and this is true for both sides, right? You
Yeah.
can find sources that are ignoring counter arguments, that are espousing ideologies that are violent and saying that that violence is the morally right thing to do.
Absolutely.
A-
Absolutely.
And in fact, the social media platforms will tend to get you down those rabbit holes. And I've read some studies that said that the rabbit hole hypothesis kind of is a little exaggerated, in that people aren't necessarily sent down them from more mild viewpoints, but they can be. And those more radical viewpoints are often, again, they're more click worthy. So it's this dangerous place where even though the internet is exciting in that it democratizes information, it's also really dangerous.
Because is all information equal?
And
right?
yeah.
And you're supposed to be able, and by a democratized information system, we hope that the right information wins out and gets the most views, but that is not what's happening.
It makes me think of economics versus behavioral economics. Like an economist would think that it's better to have the most information because the rational observer will be able to find out what the right information is.
Right.
The behavioral economist will say, no, dummy. People don't want to spend all of their time reading the news and figuring out what's real.
Yep.
So they're not going to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And now, so with the rise of social media, this is a study from 2014 done by the Pew Research Association, Pew Research Center. And obviously 2014 is an old study. So, but already in 2014, 48% of people said Facebook was among their top way of getting the news. 2014, that's 48%.
Yeah.
CNN is 44, Fox News 39 in this. Local TV at 49. I guarantee you do this study today, Facebook is at that top 60, 70%. No way it's still at 50%.
Probably.
There's no way. But already 2014, we see it topping off all the cable news channels. You know, and then Facebook. Who is one of the most popular people on Facebook? Ben Shapiro and the Daily Wire. And this is where I want to talk about some of the rise of right-wing thought leaders that have become very prominent online over the last few years, especially the last two. We saw the rise of Jordan Peterson in 2018 and 2019. I think even earlier, maybe 2016 was his rise. But Jordan B. Peterson was not specifically deeply right-wing back in those days. He just wasn't. He's changed and he's moved further to the right more than ever recently, but this is not where he started. Ben Shapiro, right? For all the bad takes I think he has, for all the conservatism that he holds, I don't think, again, he is also as bad as some of the people who are rising now. We are in a new era. First guy, Matt Walsh, and I want to talk about some things around Matt Walsh and some of the things he's talked about. So Matt Walsh has previously said that opposing all-age drag events was like fighting cancer. And he said, just like cancer, stopping it is not a gentle or painless process. What else can you take from that other than a call to violence? Right? How else? Doesn't it make sense that the guy who shot somebody for having a rainbow-colored cloth is listening to this guy who says that the LGBT drag show, whatever narrative, is like a cancer that is not a painless process to get rid of? He's telling people to go out and cut it out by shooting them in the head. That's what he's telling people to do. Okay? He says that people who are, what else does he say here? Okay. He claims that the pride flag is directly satanic. Okay. Which is a little less. Okay. Listen, we're balanced here. That's not a call to violence. That's just being an asshole.
You could argue, I don't know, for an evangelical.
Oh, true. Right.
Yeah.
If you're an evangelical reading that. Yeah. Right. So in 2022, Matt Walsh campaigned against hospitals providing transgender health care. And it led to the Boston's Children's Hospital, right around the corner from us. He directly attacked the Boston's Children's Hospital, directly attacking it. And a bunch of harassment was happened, death threats, a hoax bomb threat in August of 2022, last year.
Wow.
The whole building had to get evacuated. That woman who called in the bomb threat was actually arrested in last September.
That's good.
So But this is what's happening. He's calling out this like Boston Children's Hospital, and it's leading to someone calling it a bomb threat. So Matt Walsh is a dangerous person. Next, we have Michael Knowles. Okay, Michael Knowles actually came to Boston University last year, and he gave a speech. And I talked. I was friends with a couple of the guys in the conservative club at Boston University. That's where me and Ben went to school. And you know, I respected a couple of them. I didn't respect all of them. I didn't like all of them, but I would sit down and I would talk to them and I would go to their meetings and we'd hang out afterwards and have a good time together. It would be cool. But I asked them, I'm like, why Michael Knowles? Michael Knowles is not the type of person that you want to be as your conservative thought leader. And why do I think that? Is he says that there is no middle way in dealing with transgenderism. For the good of society, transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely.
Yeah.
What does that mean other than a direct call for violence, right? How else could you at all interpret that?
Yeah.
And then he says that America needs to be as conservative as people were in 1220 AD. 1220 AD? So that's like all of the slavery, that's like all of the religious violence.
Yeah.
Like that's like before, that's like anti-Protestant levels of religious violence, right? I mean, so this is the type of people we're dealing with here.
Yeah.
And so what is the cause of this? Or what is the effect of this rather? Well, the effect is this. In 2020, 94, 95%, 93%, somewhere around there, of all terrorist attacks were right-wing terrorist attacks in the United States. 94%. In the early 2000s, there was more commonly left-wing violence. This violence was targeted towards property specifically, and a lot of it was associated with like animal rights and targeting animal stuff. And right-wing violence is not targeting animal stuff. In 14 of the 21 years between 1994 and 2019, in which fatal terrorist attacks occurred, the majority of deaths resulted from right-wing attacks. In 8 of those years, right-wing attacks caused all of the fatalities. And in 3 more, including 2018 and 2019, they were responsible for more than 90% of annual fatalities. So this type of media environment with Roger Ailes, with Matt Walsh, with Michael Knowles, it has a body trail. Mm-hmm. And that's what we saw in Jacksonville. That's what we saw with Lori getting shot for putting a pride flag up. That's what we're seeing now. People are dying because of hatred that is being spread and profited from by these people.
Yeah. It is hard because I think that Michael Knowles quote does sound really close to promoting violence specifically, but most of this isn't. Most of this rhetoric isn't. And that seems like a really safe place to draw a line to be like, okay, you don't incite violence. But besides that,
what can you do?
You can't really control the conversation if you do want to maintain First Amendment rights for everybody.
I feel like the best thing that we could do, honestly, is keep them accountable on other forms of media and make sure that everybody's aware of what they're saying. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And make sure that people know the dangers. When I was younger, when I was like 15, 16 years old, I almost went down the right-wing rabbit hole on YouTube, right? And it was very easy back in 2015, 2016 to become hyper-radicalized. As a teenager who's, growing up and learning his place in the world, you stumble upon some, videos making fun of, feminists. 10 minutes later, you're watching Ben Shapiro. 10 minutes later, you're watching Jordan B. Peterson. And then if you're really unlucky, 10 minutes later, you're watching Stefan Molyneux. If any of you out there know who he is, he's a very dangerous individual. And then after that, you get into Alex Jones, and then you're done, right? And it's very easy to go from each one of those steps to the next video, to the next video. Nowadays, we have guys like Nick Fuentes out there who are hyper-Christian nationalists, white supremacists, that are capturing a large amount of this disaffected, majority white demographic of males that have no place to channel their discontent with the current system other than hatred of somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, too, because there are differences, there are nuances among these figures. Because I do think, a Nick Fuentes does channel that discontent, that anger towards other groups. But someone like Jordan Peterson, he emphasizes constantly how it's the individual's problem, how them not being good enough is their fault, how it's not anyone else's fault. And it's harmful in a different way because it still promotes the objectification of others, oftentimes of women. But the core message to me isn't hate other people,
Mm-hmm.
it's improve yourself. It, and it's just kind of the externalities that support that claim, which end up being problematic.
Yeah. And, again, we've talked, you've said this. I don't know how to police this. I don't know how to change this. I just know it's an issue. And, I want more people to be aware that these guys, what they're saying is promoting stochastic terrorism.
What about the approach on like a smaller individual level of people who, because I think liberals will vilify people in their own social circles who they hear supporting or appreciating Jordan Peterson, right?
Yeah, you will.
Like he's almost like the perfect bridge figure where
Yeah.
he's not an Andrew Tate, he's not quite a Ben Shapiro yet even.
Right, true.
Right? He feels like he sounds intelligent, sounds like an intellectual. He says things that will really resonate with a broad audience,
Mm-hmm.
and then can take them to that side. I think hearing people talk about like consuming his content, or even like liking something that an Andrew Tate says, or these other content creators, trying to give them space, not immediately casting these people out, or more often I think it's ridiculing them, it's laughing at them, it's just not taking them seriously, not trying to understand why they are resonating with these messages, and instead just push them aside for doing so.
Genuinely, you need more compassion.
Yeah.
You need more compassion and you need more patience.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that, I feel like liberals could actually do. If you have more patience with the people who have gone down these rabbit holes, who have gone down these media rabbit holes, and you can continue talking to them, I think that there's actual progress that you can make with them. And what happens when you go down these rabbit holes, this is a really good, so when people, not to say that all right-wing politics is like a cult, because it's not, but when people get involved into a cult, the most important thing to help them get out of it is to not totally abandon them. Like once a person gets into a cult, once a person gets into an ideology and it becomes their whole life, all their friends start becoming like that. All the media they consume becomes like that. And it gets really, really difficult for them to justify leaving all of that behind to go and be alone.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what would happen if they decide to leave the ideological ecosystem they've built for themselves. But if you're there with that life preserver waiting for them, ready to accept them back and help them back to shore, that goes a long way.
Totally. And there are also different levels to this, because people will, I've gotten responses from people when I try to encourage, or like I put out a message of being accepting of compassion of people who have different viewpoints from you, especially on the left. They say, no, this isn't the way to fight fascism, right? Fascism is always defeated. It's not brought in under your umbrella. I think that's true, but not all Republicans are fascists.
Yes.
And that's hard for some people to accept and get through their head.
We have people who unfortunately vote for fascists because they are not given the benefit of the doubt to have a reasonable conversation and sit down with.
Yeah.
So they think that the fascists will be the only ones that accept them.
Mm-hmm.
That's what ends up happening.
I mean, this is what happened in Germany.
Yep.
Like even though they supported the Nazis, they weren't, like, these individuals would not espouse fascist ideology. And I mean, some of them will. In the Republican Party, maybe even 20 to 25 to 30% of Republicans are. And I think I can probably get on board with not trying to pull those people to your side, or I guess I can get on board with fighting those people instead of trying to bring them in.
Yeah.
But so many aren't. And
More than you guys think.
yeah, and I just think understanding that people generally aren't evil, that people generally, everyone is just trying to feel good. Everyone is just trying to do what makes them feel right. And just because you have a different internal compass that points you towards a different right than them doesn't necessarily make you better or make them specifically worse.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You had another angle you wanted to go in with the media, right?
Yeah, I have a couple more things. First, on the more specific, like I want to zoom into Fox News real quick, and say why it's so specifically powerful, which is that it is enormously popular and is the most trusted source of information on cable news for the demographic that consumes the most cable news.
Ooh, that's really interesting.
Because the cable viewership obviously already skews Republican. It's older. It's generally more white. And because of that specific place, it makes it more politically powerful. So Republicans will play towards, and they'll speak in ways that they think will get them onto Fox News. So there's an example like Senators Ted Cruz and Marsha Blackburn asking exaggerated questions of President Biden's Supreme Court nominee, Ketanji Brown Jackson. Blackburn asked Jackson how she defined woman on March 22nd, and it sent Blackburn from an average of 1 mention on Fox News per day over the previous week to 5 mentions per day in the week beginning March 22nd.
Wow.
So they're playing for the attention of the base because they know it'll get them votes, and saying, like, asking things that are less pertinent to the topic at hand will do that.
Yep.
So that's just a quick point. And then I had some bigger picture thoughts that I thought would be kind of interesting to talk about. So one thing that came to my mind is whether political media is making people significantly less happy in the US. And I couldn't really, I found a few studies, but not a ton of hard data here. But I feel like it's likely a negative distraction from the tranquility that people can have in their own lives. And so there were Dutch researchers in 2017 that found that for every hard political news show consumed per week, well-being fell 6.1%. And there was an Atlantic writer who used 2014 data to find that people who identified themselves as very interested in politics were about 8 percentage points more likely to say they were not very happy about life.
Oh my God.
So
that's relatable.
Yeah, no, honestly, this was scary on a personal level because I've often found myself like feeling that the political realities of the world in this country are more real than my real life. And I'm a person who's like often very in my head, so that makes sense for me. But it did really trigger me to like just experience, I don't know, the room around me, like the external world, and that really calmed me down a lot. And the way I think is people who are watching, particularly Fox News, which really does work to stir up those fight or flight emotional responses in people based on making them really angry about things. I'm thinking that this demographic is almost entirely well off, right? Like these issues that you're worried about, these issues that we think about solving, right? Even you and I sitting here, like we think about how we want a better economy, how specifically we want to help people and raise people up who are more economically disadvantaged. How twisted would it be for us to not enjoy the privilege that we do have ourselves and instead mire ourselves in discontent,
right? Because
we are aware of the discontent of others.
Yeah.
And so that kind of just like hit me like a wave when I was thinking about this. And I want to, like, anyone who's watching this is probably deep enough down a political rabbit hole that it could definitely have the potential of making you unhappy.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So be careful of that and realize that everything that you consume through a screen and like read is not actually real life.
Yeah.
Like even though it is happening around and this can stimulate positive political action, think about what is real relationships that does make you happy.
No matter what, your personal happiness is always going to come above everything else in importance, right?
And it must.
And it must, because otherwise you're not going to be a good soldier for revolution and for reform and for change if you're an unhappy person anyway.
Yeah.
Right. And look, I've had a lot of trouble with that. So many times have I gotten depressed thinking about like how I'm scared that the world won't solve these problems, and climate catastrophe anxiety and depression is a real thing in our generation. It's a real thing. You feel hopeless. There's nothing we can really do about it, right? Yet, but now that Gen Z is getting into power, we can change things. But like there's nothing we could really do. The younger generations are all scared, and I think like it's important to understand that going into getting involved in politics, and sometimes pull yourself out of it. Take breaks.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to always constantly be thinking about.
Yeah.
And I think that leads to a lot of people gamifying it.
Totally.
Because when you gamify it, it becomes less real.
Yes.
I don't want to say politics is a game to me, because it isn't. But is it, make it easier to zoom out and talk about Meatball Ron as if some type of joke, or like watch the Republican debates and do an analysis like it's a cage fight? Yeah, it's easier to do it that way because you don't want to think about Nikki Haley raising the retirement age. You don't want to think about Ron DeSantis getting rid of abortion nationwide. You don't want to think about Vivek Ramaswamy destroying the entire executive branch of the United States. Sometimes it's just fun to think, oh man, Chris Christie really did get a good dunk on him by calling him ChatGPT. That was funny.